thumbs up and the door's closed, so no one can escape for half an hour. Welcome everybody. Welcome to my talk on Eastern Europe. My name is Simon. I'm the European Product Manager at Cox Kings. Award-winning Cox Kings. Has to go in, doesn't it? So what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to have a look at Eastern Europe, the road less travelled. So what we're really focusing on today is going to be the countries of Eastern Europe you maybe don't know so much about. So first of all, we're going to just try and set the scene a little bit and look at how we define Eastern Europe. Where does it start and where does it end? The general consensus is that it ends in the Ural Mountains, about a third of the way across Russia. But I want to just sort of set the scene a little bit this afternoon. Traditionally, Eastern Europe, really before the Russian Revolution, would have been anywhere divided by, not surprisingly, divided by religion. So you'd have Western Europe, which was your Protestant and Catholic, and Eastern, which was the Orthodox. So really, up to about 100, just over 100 years ago, Greece would have been considered Eastern Europe, and then everywhere sort of Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and the Caucasus. Then, of course, we moved on. The Russian Revolution happened. We had the Cold War started, and the Iron Curtain came up. And this is really how we still look at Eastern Europe today. So it's everywhere, really everywhere from what was Czechoslovakia, Poland, Yugoslavia, those are the places that we now know quite well, eastwards, and the Caucasus now kind of were also part of that group. But then, really, is this Eastern Europe, where Prague is further west than Vienna? But that is sadly sort of how we still look and think of Eastern Europe today. Just seen on the big screen, this is really tiny, all these country names, but we're going to go through some of those. So how do we look at Eastern Europe today? Well, like a lot of things in the 21st century, it's a little bit more complicated than that. We sort of consider Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania as almost Northern Europe, with closer ties to the Nordic countries. This area was sort of the richer Eastern European countries, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary and Slovenia, we sort of more consider Central Europe. They've got closer ties to Germany and Austria. Then you've got what we now call the Western Balkans, so Yugoslavia and Albania, minus Slovenia, which is very different culturally from the rest of what was Yugoslavia. And then really now what general consensus of Eastern Europe is then anything further east. Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Romania and Bulgaria. And I think this sort of area in red is still an area that people maybe haven't travelled to so much, are sort of lesser known really, and that's kind of what we're going to be covering today. But firstly, I thought we'd have a little bit of a go down at history. And is Eastern Europe really an emerging destination? Of course, the answer actually is no. And people were obviously travelling to Eastern Europe before the fall of the Iron Curtain. Soviet Union was advertising holidays. You could go to Odessa, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia. I'm sure there's a few people in the room who've been, especially to Yugoslavia. And you know, you could go. There was a nice cruise to Leningrad. I thought this is a little bit of a grey, gloomy. It didn't really sell to me, but you know, in-tourists thought it was going to do a good job and get everyone to Leningrad. And you had in-tourists also offering. You could go out and shoot some bears in Siberia if you fancied that, and maybe bring something home. But of course, Eastern Europe really started to open up with Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was actually the second best-selling destination for Brits in the 1980s. Only France received more foreign tourists. And you would be going often on a coach all the way to Yugoslavia to keep the prices down. Yeah, of course, Lake Bled was really popular, and apparently only a few years ago, Lake Bled received more tourists than it did during the Yugoslav days. It only just got that number of tourists back, which I found quite amazing. But yeah, you had highlights of Yugoslavia for £222, which I thought wasn't too bad for a 2-week tour. That's about £600 just over £600 in today's money. Still great value. Yugoslavia was really cheap, and that's why people were going there. These again look nice on the laptop, but they're probably a little bit small. But you know, you would a tour to Central Europe would fly you into Frankfurt, and then you travel into Czechoslovakia from there. But you can't see it on here, but there'd be a whole half day just allowed into an itinerary to cross the border. So it was not, these weren't easy places to visit. Of course now things have changed. Travelling in Eastern Europe today is easier than ever. This is the network from Luton and some of the other regional airports to Eastern Europe with Wizz Air. And nearly every capital and major city in Eastern Europe you can get direct flights. These places are so open to us now and easy to travel around in. This is in Poland. They've got a high-speed train now going from Gdansk all the way to Krakow. And Ukraine has also just opened a high-speed line between Kiev and Lviv. So Eastern Europe is becoming so much more accessible. Having a quick look at where people are going in Eastern Europe, and this goes on to where my talk's going to go this afternoon. So Poland is by far the biggest selling destination in the region, but we can't really differentiate between locals who are travelling there and people who are going as tourists. And then Croatia obviously is booming, or Yugoslavia. This is where most people were going in Yugoslavia, was the Croatia Republic of the country. Czech Republic, Hungary, then you see it really drops back in number of tourists. And some of the countries we're going to have a quick look at today are Ukraine, Belarus, Macedonia, Moldova. You see that it's just not getting the same number of tourists. So this is the time to go, because these countries are going to become more and more popular, and I expect this graph to move up and up towards the others as we, as time goes on. People start to discover these areas. So, in my rapid talk, we don't have all that long, and there's obviously a lot of countries that we could have covered today. So I've tried to pick the ones that I hope will, the ones that maybe you guys don't know so well, and ones that maybe you have a view of that you aren't, that I want to try and change that view for you. So we're going to cover Kosovo, which obviously some countries don't even recognise as a country yet. North Macedonia, Bulgaria, Moldova, Ukraine, and Belarus. So we're going to start in North Macedonia, which is obviously only recently known as North Macedonia. Until about March last year, it was the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, due to its rather thorny relationship with the state of Macedonia in Greece. It's a small country, not much bigger than Wales. Skopje is the capital, and a few years ago it had a rather sort of nationalist government who decided they were going to make everything sort of look kind of like it would have done in Greek times, but what they actually came back with was something that looked a little bit more like Las Vegas. It was built very quickly and a bit on the cheap. And it's all sort of starting to crumble a little bit, but it has some charm, and it's quirky. I'm going to use the word quirky a lot as we travel through this little journey today. These countries they're trying to find their identity, and for Macedonia that's about Alexander the Great and really ancient Greece, which of course included this region, and they're holding on to it, and the Greeks aren't happy. But it makes for an interesting place to visit. And they've got these statues everywhere, and you'll ask a Macedonian, and they're like, well, who are these people? Like, I don't know. But they're these great and glorious Macedonians. So it's fun. It's all about them trying to build an identity, and I like that. But the big selling point in Macedonia is Lake Ohrid. This place is beautiful. Now, I went, as you can see, in the winter, so you don't see it quite in all its glory, but the mountains surrounding it are beautiful. It's a huge lake, and it's actually the deepest lake in Europe, I believe. And you've got this beautiful church setting, which is becoming quite a well-known site. And what's interesting is there's only one UNESCO World Heritage Site in North Macedonia, and that is Lake Ohrid. But what makes it special is that it's kind of been awarded twice. So for its culture and history, and also for the nature. We've got these lovely little Ottoman houses in the main town. You'll see this architecture, we're going to see this architecture a lot, with this sort of dark wooden frames and white walls. We'll see those as we move through this region of Europe. It's just this lovely lakeside setting. There's their sort of their famous flag flying, which is a symbol of Alexander the Great, and it's just a lovely place to relax, take a boat ride. Even in the, I mean, this is a beautiful sunny day in the middle of winter, but it's still fairly mild, and yeah, a lovely little place to visit. And one that's not really on the tourist trail in Macedonia, but it is on the Cox Kings tour. A little plug there, is Kosovo. Now, some people may remember Kosovo. It took in masses of refugees during the Kosovo War and really struggled with that. But it has this unique mosque, which this is really the only thing you go and see them. It's a nice little stop. And what's unique about it, I don't know if anyone notices the really clear, obvious thing here on this mosque is that it doesn't have a dome. It only has a dome inside the roof. But on the outside, it doesn't have a dome, which is quite specific. What's happening? Can they hear me? Oh, I still and it's painted on the exterior, which makes it quite unique, and it dates back to the 14th century. And again, it's just not really any tourists there, and still sort of waiting to be discovered. And that's the interior. Again, it's painted, it's got this floral painting, which also is very unique, but it's very small, it's really quite cute, and yeah, you're not really going to see any other tourists there. So we're going to rapidly move through these a bit, because I want to try and cover as much as possible. So we're jumping onto Kosovo. Now, Kosovo is a country that's still trying to find itself as well, find its identity. Major countries in Europe still don't recognise Kosovo, Spain being the most well-known one of those for obvious reasons. They don't want Catalan to follow the same path as Kosovo did with Serbia and claim independence. But it's a great little country. This is Prizren. Now, Prizren is not the capital, it's the second city, but it is very much the sort of cultural capital of Kosovo, and it is utterly charming. It's got this lovely sort of riverside setting. There's the 14th century UNESCO listed mosque that sits in the middle of the town, and you'll see this same sort of Balkan architecture with these white walls and the dark wooden window frames, which is sort of quite common. But it's this lovely riverside setting, cafes, it's a really peaceful, charming place, so many people out on the streets. Really cheap. It's in the euro, and you sort of think, oh, this is what the euro used to feel like a few years ago. You're paying £1 for a coffee, a couple of pounds for a kebab, and it's got a nice sort of charming, buzzing nightlife. Not rocking, but this again, this lovely riverside setting, set in this sort of wonderful valley. But one sad legacy of Kosovo that you'll see everywhere is not the plastic, the only use of plastic, which there is the flags. And this is a sort of reminder of the war. These are purely there to allow local citizens to boycott certain products, which I think is a bit sad. So you'll see the Albanian water is selling better than the Serbian water. But that's normal there. You sort of think, how's this country going to move on and identify as a country in itself if people won't even buy a bottle of water from their old neighbour? It's sad that it's part of the country, but it's something you learn about there and you sort of learn to understand. Then we move on to Pristina. Now, Pristina has been named on several occasions the ugliest capital in Europe. Now, it's not going to win many awards, but it has kind of its uniqueness, and it's a new country, and this new war monument is very famous there, and they change the murals on that every year. There's memorials, obviously, to the war. This is a memorial to women who were raped during the war, and it's quite a poignant reminder because what's interesting, memorials to the war are so new. And I think we're used to war memorials being from the Second World War, the First World War, and this kind of brings home that this was only 20 years ago now. This has been named, so we're in the ugliest capital in Europe, and this has been named the ugliest building in the world. Of course, some of you may have seen it before, but when you learn a little bit about this you realise that there's more to this building than this twisted metal and concrete. And these white domes represent the traditional hats that Albanian men would have worn. Many musicians and entertainers would have worn them. And then you've got this sort of barbed wire, and what it's meant to, what the building is meant to depict, and maybe didn't quite do it well enough, is that it's meant to be the encasing of the Albanian culture and the caging of the Albanian culture, which of course led to that war. And when you go there and see it and hear a local talk about what this library represents, sorry, I don't think I even said it was a library, it's the National Library of Kosovo, and what it represents is kind of more powerful, and you learn about that when you're there, and you understand that culture and how it was repressed under Yugoslav rule and under Serbian rule, and you kind of get a bit more of an understanding of the country. Anyway, we're going to jump on. Bulgaria. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about this rather strange building in a minute. But what do we think of when we think of Bulgaria? Bulgaria is probably the most well-known destination here that we're going to talk about. We think of places like Sun Beach. These are the sort of cheapest of the cheap. 3-star all-inclusive, Russians, and that's kind of what we sort of think of as Bulgaria. But Bulgaria has so much to offer a tourist who's looking for more culture. This is the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral in the centre of Sofia, and it's probably the most well-known cultural site in the city. But one of the things I found most interesting is Sofia decided, you know, like, we need to be we're a modern country. What do we build in our capital to be a modern country? We build a metro. So they're like, okay, right, we just need to start digging a hole for a metro. Great. What do we find? Oh, a great big Roman city. But what are we going to do? So they incorporate. I tried to find a picture of it, and my pictures were a bit too dark. But so they started digging this metro, and they found the whole ancient city. Bulgaria is an ancient country, and this is an ancient city right under the streets of Sofia. And what they've done is, you need to go and experience it. The corridors of the metro are the streets of old Sofia, of Rome. Well, it wasn't old Sofia, but Roman Sofia, and the walls of the tunnels to the train platforms are all brick, and you can see that these were streets within the old town. So like, well, we'll just build the metro around this old street, and it's quite wonderful and quite nice the way it's been mixed. So jumping on is Plovdiv. So Plovdiv is the second city of Bulgaria, and it hosted European Capital of Culture a couple of years ago, so it really got smartened up. It is utterly charming. Doesn't really have any tourists. It's these lovely, all these houses are painted. Again, this sort of similar Ottoman architecture we were talking about with these dark wooden frames. But it's these lovely cobbled streets, twisted streets, these sort of stacked houses. Lovely cafe culture, really peaceful, really friendly. They love seeing tourists. It's a high-tech hub in Bulgaria, so it has a big young community, buzzing little restaurants, and it's just a great place to experience a couple of days, really away from the tourists. Experience of Bulgaria that people don't really know exists. But my favourite place in Bulgaria is this Buzluza monument. Now, it was built in 1981 by the communist government, and what you notice in Bulgaria is the communist government in Bulgaria love these massive concrete buildings. Some of the largest concrete structures in the world are in Bulgaria. And you sort of think, oh, that's all ugly. But it's part of their history, and it's their recent history, and this has all been abandoned. It's on this hillside in the middle of nowhere in Bulgaria. It took us quite a long time to drive there, and that gives you a scale of how big this is. I know I'm not very big, but it is enormous. And that's the outside. This is a conference centre, and the communist government has built this great big flying saucer thing on the middle of a mountainside in Bulgaria, and it was only open for 9 years before it then just fell into disrepair. But to give you an idea of the scale of this monument, it's very easy to get up there. You just drive up and park, it's fine. But this wall here is this wall here. So that gives you an idea of how enormous this building is. I'm sorry, I should have put a picture of the interior in there to give you an idea of it, but you can't actually get in. You can break in, but I didn't really fancy it in shorts and t-shirt, and my only torch being the one on my mobile phone. But this is all that's left abandoned. You can go and see it and experience it, and feel the modern history of this country that actually I think is sadly quite misunderstood as a cheap seaside destination when there's so much there to see. So we're going to move north. I've skipped Romania. Romania is quite popular, a lot of people have already been. So I move on to Moldova. Now, I mentioned earlier in this, I was going to talk about quirky. Moldova is the quirkiest little place I've ever been. It's a small country, you can see quite a lot of it in a couple of days, and it really is worth a couple of days. Now, not many people even know much about the country. It was a Soviet Union republic until '91, and then gained independence from there, obviously, at that time. And then it's just now. Now, most European capitals, they have a nice little old quarter, there's something to see. Not just now. This is basically it. There was a massive earthquake there in 1940, so right in the middle of World War II, when the people there were suffering so much, there was a colossal earthquake, and most of the city was flattened. So you don't really go to Chisinau for that, but it's quite a poor country. It's Moldova is one of the only places now in Eastern Europe where you still see these little old Zhigulis, Ladas, Skodas. Most of Eastern Europe now, they've got pretty modern cars. So it's quite fun to see these still chugging around. And they used to get a lot of bad press, but they can't be that bad. They're still going. And then Old Ori, we saw the sort of drone footage of it a minute ago on the first slide. It's a little monastery on the cliff edge here. It dates back to about the 9th century, I believe. It's one of the highlights of the country. And in this area as well, Moldova is really focusing on its sort of folklore, history. There's these little sort of charming thatched cottages everywhere, all brightly painted, these sort of decorative window frames. And I challenge anyone to go to Moldova and get away with not trying to make bread. They love doing it, and they will be showing you bread, you'll be dancing, there's a lot of folk singing, but these ladies, they chat to you like you can speak Moldovan or Romanian perfectly, and they're all chatting away to you, and you're like, yeah, okay. But yeah, you will not get out of Moldova without baking some bread. And another really, now I mentioned quirky, here we go. Transnistria is the breakaway republic of Moldova. It's just one side of one river in the country, and they claim independence. They're much more Russia-focused. They want to be part of Russia. They're never going to be. They're not recognised by any country in the world, yet you still need your passport to go in there. You have to change money. They don't use their money. They don't use their stamps. So Transnistria has Triaspol as the capital. We've got a nice Soviet tank there. Lenin's still standing proud over their beautiful parliament here, these lovely air conditioning units. And when I was there, it was back in 2014 I was there, and it was nearly Independence Day. So 14 years of independence from no one. So very few cars on the streets, and I was on a group tour, and there was someone there who'd been to Russia, they'd been to the Soviet Union, and they said, this is kind of what it was like. Because I sort of thought, oh yeah, they just hark back to those days, blah blah blah, it's a bit of a marketing thing. And they said, no, this really is what it's like. These sort of slightly empty streets and big wide roads and sort of patriotic posters everywhere. There's still hammers and sickles everywhere. And it is a little bit like stepping back in time, so it's an absolute must on any itinerary in Moldova. Moldova's biggest section of its economy is winemaking. A lot of the fine wines and champagnes for the Soviet Union came from Moldova and Georgia as well. They really pride themselves in this, and they're really becoming a niche wine-making region of the world. It is on about the same sort of latitude as Tuscany. So the countryside of Moldova looks a little bit like Tuscany, just with a few more trabbies chugging along. Yeah, so we went out and you meet one of the pickers, and I don't know if it's just for the tourists, but they've got these sort of little traditional tops on, but they're just their jeans and trainers. I quite like that. They're sort of, there's something about that. They're proud of their culture. And the largest wine cellar in the world is in Moldova. So if you ever get a pub quiz, you never know, it may turn up. It's in Moldova. And you go down in these little buggies, and you have to drive through the streets. You get to all these wine cellars, and they even run a marathon through here. So if you fancy running a marathon with a little wine stop along the way, then this is the place to do it. Get to Moldova, Wizz Air fly there. Yeah, there's just an example. The Kosovo wine cellars is one of the finest wines in the region, and obviously they're producing sparkling wines and everything as well, red, white and rosé. A few places in London stock it, so have a look. Right, we're moving on again. Time's running out on Monday and Thursday. Ukraine. Ukraine's the largest country in Europe proper, the largest one solely within Europe. It's about twice the size of France. So when you have people worried about the war there and not wanting to go there, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of kilometres away, even in Kiev. So Kiev obviously is the capital, and it's sort of synonymous these days really with a revolution. They usually bring in a government, decide they don't like it, because nothing's been fixed overnight, and then they have another revolution. They're pretty good at them. And also by winning Eurovision, they're the only country to have won it twice from Eastern Europe, fact of the day. And this is Kiev. Kiev is really quite green, full of all these beautiful gold dome monasteries. And it's got its ugly side as well, of course, but it's a nice city. It's a good city break. It's a great place to experience a lot of what we sort of more think of this sort of Orthodox Russian culture. Because Kiev was originally the capital of Kiev Rus, which was the starting nation that became Russia. So much to their sort of, a lot of people in Ukraine wouldn't agree with you, there is a lot of Russian culture all mixed in Ukraine, and it reflects in these sort of onion-domed gold monasteries and churches that you see. Of course, Ukraine suffered immensely during World War II. The Museum of the Great Patriotic War, as it's known, is one of the best World War II museums I've been to in Europe. There's these wonderful, huge friezes there. All the people are rising up, and it's a really powerful, quite interesting, really interesting place to go and see. But then, a city that we may not associate with Ukraine so much is Lviv, or Lviv. And it's right over on the west, and it was actually part of Czechoslovakia until the war. And you might see these buildings, they're calling it Little Prague. Couple of airlines now flying there directly. It makes a great city break. It's really cheap. Ukraine's currency is one of the only ones in the world that's performing worse than the pound. So it's cheap. You can see, I'm sure many of you have been to Prague or Krakow, and it's very, very similar. That's the Opera House in Lviv. Lovely open squares, parks, cafes, great coffee culture, and as I said, cheap jets, so worth a visit. Now, of course, the other thing Ukraine is so well associated with, we can't not talk about, is Chernobyl, and now sort of immortalised in the incredible HBO show that we had over here. I'm sure many of you have seen it, and of course it's one of the great tragedies of Eastern Europe, and it is something that we sort of, sadly, this is what we often think of when we think of Eastern Europe: grey, dull, miserable, communist era, everything being hidden up, secrets and lies, and that's not what Eastern Europe's about. What I'm showing you is something different, but visiting Chernobyl is something you kind of have to do if you ever go to Ukraine. It reminds you of what it used to be like, and that secrecy. Now, when I went, it was a slightly rainy day. This is the entrance to the power station, and it just felt eerie, it felt creepy, dark. when I went, this is what the power station looked like. This is before they built it. And it really sort of brings it all home. And then there's the abandoned town of Pripyat, which was this was a showcase of communist and Soviet architecture of its time. The people who moved to this town had died and gone to heaven in the Soviet Union. They were looked after, they had a fun fair, they had Ferris wheels, they had a leisure centre. These people lived like we live today, and they were all covered up, they were told to leave overnight, and that was it, they were gone. And going here and experiencing this is really, really powerful. Yeah, we go to the school, and these posters are all still just lying in the corridors, harking back to those days of a proud and glorious nation, which of course fell only a few years after this catastrophe. And it's a bit that I should maybe have left on this sad note in Ukraine, but it really is worth seeing. So our final destination today is Belarus. Now, Belarus is the largest landlocked country in Europe, and it's probably the one we know the least about. It's the one we associate with dictatorship, the last dictatorship in Europe, which it is. I went there and experienced it. The internet is monitored. You can't get on Wi-Fi without putting your mobile phone number in to unlock Wi-Fi. There is a little bit of that still. People speak very highly of the government. But it is starting to open up. Now the best thing, and this is the time to go to Belarus, is they've just relaxed the visa regulations. They used to have Russian-style visa regulations there, where you had to go and fill out all these forms, all this. But now, if you fly directly into Kiev, you can stay for up to 3 months visa-free. So, and people are just starting to cotton onto this. So this is going to become a popular destination. There is enough to see in Belarus, and I really recommend it. So Minsk is the capital. Somewhere that's associated with being grey and miserable, somewhere to escape to, get away from your girlfriend, if anyone knows the Friends reference to Minsk. But Minsk is clean, fresh, modern, sparkling clean. It's got a rather little sort of charming rebuilt old town on the lake, big modern buildings. But one of my favourite buildings is the House of Fashion. A great big concrete frieze, and it's about fashion. And one of my favourite points is it's grand, all these communist workers march to the people and KFC. It just sums up kind of how Eastern Europe is now, you know. It's this modern Western culture, and it's still got this sort of really interesting history, quite modern history that most people who are alive still remember. And I just quite like that. I think that's quite fun. And then, again, Belarus suffered immensely during World War II. The whole of Minsk was almost flattened. It really was the epicenter. When the Soviets were coming from Moscow, the Nazis are coming from Berlin. Where do they meet? Belarus. So there's a lot of these big communist monuments. I should have, again, a bit like with that picture in Bulgaria, I maybe should have put a picture of me here to give you an idea of scale of how big this is, the Mountain of Glory, which you see on the drive in from Minsk Airport into the city. Lots of these big concrete, well, this isn't concrete, I said it's concrete, it's not. These are mosaics. So this is covered in gold mosaic on the outside and red mosaic on the inside. And it's sort of representing the suffering of the soldiers in this region. But there's monuments like this everywhere. I'm not going to cover it today, but this is, again, this is about 100 feet high, and this is a Soviet soldier. So moving on, modern architecture in Belarus is pretty quirky as well. That's their national library. I don't know, you can choose between this one and the one in Pristina, it's up to you. But both are rather strange. And I've forgotten what it's called. It's the largest, it's not an octagon, but like it's the largest octagonal building in the world, or whatever it is. An octagonal cube, I don't know. But they're very proud of this. And you're like, okay, great. It all lights up at night, and it's something to see in modern Minsk. That's the Opera House, beautiful 1930s sort of Soviet Art Deco building of the period. And we went to see an absolutely world-class opera there for £12 was the face ticket. And it's actually the sister company to the Bolshoi in Moscow, which now you'll pay £90, £100 to go to. £12 was the ticket, and it really was world class. Outside of Belarus, you've got some historical UNESCO churches and castles. This is Mir Castle. It's quite unique because it's brick and plaster work, and it's pink. It doesn't really show on the big screen. On my little camera here, it looks a bit better. The screen hasn't quite brought up. It's a pink castle. It's rather charming with this sort of lakeside setting. And then the other big thing that's covering in tourism at the moment in Belarus is that Belarus is a country that still makes things, unlike a lot of places in Europe. It's one of the largest producers of tractors in the world. Now, if you have a look at the metro, I don't know if any of you picked up the metro today, but in there is the Cox Kings tour, and that talks about the tractor factory that you can go and see. And this is the Belarus truck factory, which I had the pleasure of going to see. And these are the largest trucks in the world. And these are not Lego men, these are people. And these get exported out into Siberia, and mostly Siberia and Australia. We don't quite know what we're doing on the planet by building these things, but they're there. And it is, no matter how you sort of think about environment implications of such trucks, you go there and see the construction of these things, and it is pretty extraordinary. But they're really pushing this kind of unique tourism there, and it's definitely an interest for people who want to go and see something completely different, can't go and see this in Greece. So I'm kind of starting to finish up there. That gives you a sort of sense of scale. Like I said, I'm not very big, but that's still a big truck. I showed this to my niece. Yeah, they loved it. They thought it was like, Simon's in a Lego truck. So yeah, they thought it was great. But yeah, so I'm just going to leave my talk there. I would love to have covered a lot more of these countries, and if anyone wants to have a chat about any of the other countries I haven't covered today, then come and see me. But I hope this gives you an idea of that it isn't all sort of misery like we saw there in Chernobyl. There's lots of colour, there's lots of places to see, lots of history, and it's just a great place to go and experience it. You need to get out now, because these more unusual corners of Europe are going to become more and more popular. So just the last bit before we do a quick Q&A. So we've got a competition to go and visit Russia, again a country that many of you maybe haven't been to. I mean, again, it's another one that's quite misunderstood. I'm sorry I didn't get to cover it today, but if anyone wants to have a chat about that, I'm at the stand all day. And we've got the competition to win 2 places on our tour there, and we're at stand AP132. And did anyone have any questions about the talk today? I'm sorry if I was a bit rapid and covered a lot, but it's hard not to. Any questions? Yes? It's as safe as anywhere else in Europe. In Belarus especially, I felt very safe. It's really clean. Yeah, it's Kosovo maybe. I mean, when we drove from Prizren to Pristina. Sorry, the gentleman, you probably didn't hear. The gentleman just asked how safe this region of Europe is. Now, when we drove from Prizren to Pristina in Kosovo, we drove through a town. You know, you just suddenly get a feel for somewhere, and you're like, I kind of want to lock the door here. And he said we wouldn't get out here. And it's the only Serbian town in that region of Kosovo. And yeah, so there are places obviously that aren't safe, but then there are places that aren't safe in London. But as far as like in Ukraine, where there is still a war rumbling on, there's issues with Crimea, Kiev, Lviv, Chernobyl, these sort of areas that people go are a long, long way from those areas. It's perfectly safe. Yes, there you go.
Similar question, but how safe is it for single female travelers, young adult?
These countries have huge respect for women. So under the Soviet period, all women worked, all women, all men were all treated the same. And there'd be no, I don't think you'd have any issues, especially in places in the capitals and stuff. There'd be women walking around on their own all the time. You'd have no real problem. Obviously, don't go down a back alley, but then you wouldn't do that anyway. But yeah, generally it's completely safe. These are civilised, relatively wealthy places now, and I think it'd be absolutely fine. And any other questions? Gentleman here, and then the lady at the back in purple.
Other than Belarus, which you mentioned, which other countries covered do you need a visa for in advance, not just from there?
You don't need a visa for any country in Europe now other than Russia.
Thank you.
And the lady in the purple dress. Can you put the microphone a bit closer? I can't hear, sorry.
Given you can get by in France and Spain and
Yep.
coffee things, and not many people have been to these places, what's the language they like for ordering or getting by?
Sorry, I didn't pick that up.
I mean, is English spoken widely?
Oh, yeah. Especially by younger people. So anyone who was sort of born in 80s onwards, they weren't learning Russian in school. That was all stopped, and they all learned English. So you go to these countries, and nearly everyone who's working in a cafe or a bar or in tourist destinations will all speak English. So especially these countries, you won't have that much trouble at all. Belarus maybe a tiny bit, but really not so much. And just to mention on that as well, you're saying that lots of people have been to Spain and Greece and places. And in those countries, we wouldn't really think anything of hiring a car and driving around ourselves. And in these countries, less so. People don't feel that sort of so confident doing it. And a lot of these places I've been more as with groups and travelling with work. So I'm travelling with other people within the industry. But when I went to Bulgaria, if you remember me at the monument there, we did that with a car and we just drove. And the roads were a bit bumpy, but with sat nav and everything now, it's really easy just to drive around. We can explore these places independently, just to mention that. Yeah, sure.
You showed a high-speed train between Kiev and Lviv.
Yeah.
How long is the journey, and is it expensive?
When I say high speed, let's say high speed.
Well, fairly high speed.
It's not a TGV, but it's certainly a lot better than it was. I think it's about 5 hours, and price-wise, I think it's about between £6 and £12, something like that. So that's crossing an area about the size of France.
It cost me a lot more to come from Bedford today.
About that, yeah.
Hello, question about public transport. I
Yeah.
don't drive and usually try and use public transport when travelling abroad.
Yeah.
Moldova, in order to see a lot of the main sites, can you do that on public transport? I did that in Kosovo and it was fine, but Moldova's, some of the images looked like they were a bit more remote.
Yeah, the big thing in Romania, in Moldova, like I said, is not Chisinau. Chisinau is not really, I mean, you go and see it, it's not the place really to see. But the thing is Moldova is so cheap that what you'll probably have is, we would probably be, well, we can do it, but anyway, if you were to do it, is you just have a private guide, so you have a taxi, or a private car that would drive you, and that's going to probably cost you. I'll be honest, I don't know how much that would cost, but that is, if you're an individual or a couple travelling around Moldova, we tend to do it with a private driver and guide, or driver guide, so it's one person. They drive and they're also your guide, but that's minimal cost. There is sort of a train network in Moldova, but that's really in between the towns, and that's not the place to go. So yeah, if you don't want to hire a car, which you probably wouldn't, I might not even do that, is with a driver guide. Yeah. Anyone else? Sorry, I could have probably run down here with this one for you. I told you where you were.
Accommodation.
Sorry?
Accommodation.
Mm-hmm.
How accessible is it price-wise? How reasonable is it? Would you need to book in advance, or are you likely to get accommodation accessible?
Yeah. most of the places I've covered, so the gentleman, I don't know how well you can hear that, but he just asking about accommodation prices and standards of accommodation. I didn't really kind of cover any of that on this today, because it just isn't really time. But in all these cities, all these capital cities, there's a huge broad range of accommodation from the 5-star luxury through to quite basic accommodation, and it's all very accessible, really good value, and in the sort of more rural settings. So I don't know if you remember on the Moldova section, I showed you the thatched cottage with the blue painted outside. That I believe might be a B&B or like a pension. So there's a lot of these places that are opening up in rural areas, and then they have a bit more money so they can do it up, and you're staying in more like a homestay, and you're paying minimal for that, but you're really experiencing something local. Right? Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much.